Well, let's get going here. And just want to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. This is the Emotional Recovery Lecture Series that Lawrence and I put together actually 4 years ago, and then COVID hit and it had to go away. Then we realized we could go virtual and reach more and more people. Usually in our audience, we have people all the way from Europe to Mexico to all parts of the United States, plus all of our people who are in the Rio Grande Valley, Las Vegas, Raton, and all those areas. So we thank you for being here and really appreciate it. Before we introduce our very special guest today, I want to thank Rio Grande ATP for putting this together, especially their CEO, Lawrence Medina, who through his grants and through his push and also pushing me quite often, we get to have this every quarter. Really grateful for that. Rio Grande ATP is a recovery center or organization located in Raton, Las Vegas, and Taos, where we have intensive outpatient for substance use disorder, as well as our drug courts, DWI courts, and domestic violence courts. We also have Recover Friendly Taos, which is here in Taos, which is helping people find that base safety from that area of just how do we get housing to showers to laundry to really helping make sure that we all have a chance to have recovery and have that chance to stay in recovery. And so thanks to Rio Grande ATP, we have these wonderful, amazing services in northern New Mexico. And Lawrence, I want to really thank you for that and for all the work you've done. Rio Grande has grown immensely over the last couple of years as it combined with Golden Willow Counseling. And we brought that under one roof in order to make sure we could give the services needed, as well as support all the providers that we need to be able to give those services. And my name is Ted Wired. I'm the clinical director of Rio Grande ATP. I'm also the founder of Golden Willow Retreat, which is an emotional healing center focused on grief and loss. And back in the day, about 10 years ago, Golden Willow Retreat realized we needed all of our different services to have a place, all the different organizations to talk. And we started our breakfast series and just made sure we had breakfast of all the different providers to come together. And then Lawrence and I realized another way to do that would be through an emotional healing lecture series. And so we've kept this going, and thanks to all of you, it's still going, and really appreciate everyone being here. So just wanted to start with that. I want to thank everyone for being here. It takes a lot of bravery to show up for a talk like this. Also, some of you might feel you have to be here, and bottom line, maybe there is some credit or some issue like that, but you have chosen to be here, and I want to honor that piece. It's an evening. You chose to log in, you chose to be in your groups, you chose to go ahead and be here for this talk. And I give great credit to that. There are so many barriers to recovery, of any type of recovery. And so to choose to be here is amazing, and I thank you. Also want to thank all the different providers that are in the room. And in my beliefs, every single person in this room is a provider in their own way, and we can all be of service. And so once again, thank you. I know this isn't easy. And as you and I both know, a big part of a 12-step is being of service. And a big piece of emotional sobriety is having intellectual handholds so that we can do our spiritual and emotional work. And so this is a chance that you and I have committed to heavily for many years now, of trying to give out information from amazing people so that our brains can have that piece, so that I'll say our souls can move forward to their full potential. So thanks for all that work. And with that said, I would like to introduce our guest, who I got to meet a very interesting way. She happened to be at the barn dance here in Taos, visiting Taos, which she already knows and loves. And she was talking about a place called Golden Willow Retreat. And she was saying how she was hoping she could connect and how it hadn't quite happened. Well, it just happened. One of our board members was standing in front of her and turned around. So the next day, Patti and our board member came out to Golden Willow Retreat. I got to meet Patti and see what an amazing person she was. And like we all do with electronic world now, I got to just kind of snoop around and find out those different parts about her. And then she, of course, as we like to do, she took the advantage to ask me to be on a talk show she did, and she got to interview me. And the way we get to play that game is then I got to say, oh, by the way, Patti, would you do a talk for us? And of course, she didn't even hesitate as soon as she saw it wasn't a conflict with her schedule. And so here she is. Dr. Patti Ashley is a professional counselor who over the last 40 years of experience has been able to help people be their authentic self, coming from a place of self-love. Self-love takes an immense amount of work to release the barriers that hold us back from our true potential. Dr. Ashley guides so many through this process with her wisdom and heart. And with that, she gets to introduce herself some more. So let us please welcome Dr. Patti Ashley back on the screen with me again, and now with all of you. Patti, so grateful you're here. And now it is your show, and I'm going to mute myself. Thanks, Patti.
No, don't mute yourself. We might have a conversation here today. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Lawrence and Francis and Ted, for all your hard work and pulling this all together. And such an honor. And yeah, the synchronistic meeting experience at the Big Barn Dance. I think I've been to about 15 Big Barn Dances. It's something I look forward to every year. And I don't know if we can say the name of your board member or not, but the woman that I met, she was amazing. And she said, you have to meet Ted and you know, and then this weekend whirlwind of me seeing Golden Willow, because I had seen it online. So my story is I lost my father to a sudden heart attack when I was 11 years old. And in a Catholic family, I was told to move on. You know, he's in heaven, just go back to school, and we don't really want to talk about it. And so I had kind of a troubled teen years. You can just imagine I got into some pretty destructive behaviors. But I knew that my life's work was going to be a therapist, so I could talk to people about grief. And so I spent many years, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm old. That was many years ago when my father died. And then I ended up with an amazing relationship with a man that ended after only 2 years of him dying of a sudden heart attack the same way my father had. So I thought I knew grief, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do it right this time. And you know how that goes, right? It's like, how does anybody know how to do grief? It just hurts like hell. And so anyway, I kept thinking, you know, golly, what I would love to do is and one day in my work is have a retreat center where people can go. And Ted, I have to say, I put a shout out to you Friday. I was on a local TV show talking about the launch of my memoir that I wrote, Letters to Freedom, about what I'm telling you all about. And the talk show host said, you know, well, what do people need? You know, and I said, well, what I needed, and I just found this amazing man, Dead Wired, in New Mexico, who's doing it. A place for people to go and be held and witnessed and go through something that is like having your heart ripped in shreds. So meeting you and seeing Golden Willow was just such an amazing thing after, you know, me having this idea of this is something that I think people need, and seeing what you've done. It's just beautiful. And then for us to have this connection and do the Facebook Live and be here today. So thank you so much. So my work has been started with, like I said, the grief. And then I got married really young to a man that probably wasn't, you know, the best person to be with, but I decided I was Catholic and I was gonna make it work. And I had lots of children with him, and then got into the parenting thing and wanted to be a good parent, and realized that, boy, that was really hard. So I ended up getting a couple degrees, one in working with in child development, and then one in then I decided I'm going to get a PhD because I still want to be a therapist. And so I researched that experience of women not feeling good enough, because it seemed to be a thing that parents didn't feel good enough. And then my work evolved into, now what I do is looking at shame. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Scary word, right? Shame. So I want to demystify what it is for you tonight, so it isn't such a scary word, and also help you understand what that experience is, and then some ways to actually change your brain and your nervous system by doing really cool things. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And that's who I am. I'm a therapist here in Boulder, Colorado. I have a private practice. I also do teachings and trainings for professional organizations. And I've written 3 books and have a lot more to write. So that being said, I think I'm ready to share my screen and we can get started. Is everybody ready? Okay, this is the title. It's a long title, Taming Shame on the Road to Self-Compassion and Emotional Sobriety. Did you write that, Ted? I know you didn't. I'm going to blame you. That's my shame. I'm going to shame you. It's a long title. What the hell does it mean, right? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all those big words. Here's my 3 books. Again, I mentioned The Letters to Freedom is the memoir of grief about my partner and my dad. The Shadow of the Too Good Mother is about my dissertation on women not feeling good enough. And Shame Informed Therapy is my last book for therapists to do the work with naming shame and taming shame on the road to self-compassion and emotional sobriety. So what we're going to learn today is the difference between guilt, shame, and core shame, how core shame hijacks the limbic and autonomic nervous systems, how you can develop emotional literacy and tolerate discomfort and emotional sobriety, and how you can write and embody a new story of self-compassion, love, and belonging. That's a lot we're going to do in an hour and a half, but I'm going to do the best I can, and hold on to your hats. Like I said, if you have a journal or paper around, that would be really helpful. I'm going to start with back to paradox. Gershon Kaufman, who was an early shame researcher, says that the paradox about shame is that there is shame about shame. So even the word shame may have you like terrified tonight, because just the word itself is loaded and shaming. But I'm going to helpfully demystify that a little bit. So hold on. We're going to make it maybe not so scary in a minute. And because it is kind of a big, heavy topic, sometimes it's good to give yourself permission to step into something that might be a little uncomfortable, and maybe think about how you might want to step into it in a different way than what you're used to. For example, you might want to be open to vulnerability, or, let go of your expectations that you think, oh, this is just another stupid lecture, or I got to get something out of this and heal my shame, or whatever your expectations are. Maybe you want to be brave. You want to just kind of be really courageous and say, I'm going to really take a look at this shame, whatever it is thing today. Or maybe there's something else. Maybe you want to be more curious. So this is your first assignment, is your permission slip. So in your notebook or whatever, just think for a minute. I want to do something different tonight. What do I want to give myself permission to do? And then just jot that down when you think of it. Again, it could be one of these things. It could be something else. People are still coming in. All right, I'm going to give myself permission to let go of worrying about being good enough and do the best I can. All right, so jot it down if you know it, or if it comes to you, just make a little note of that. And we're going to start with, what is shame? Brene Brown, if you don't know who she is a researcher at the University of Houston, and she kind of made shame sort of mainstream in her TED Talk in 2010 that went viral on vulnerability. And now she has a Netflix TV show. Not Netflix. She has a Netflix show. Actually, she has a Netflix and an HBO Max show now. This is her new book, Atlas of the Heart. Highly recommend it. This is what her HBO Max series is about. Mapping meaningful connection and language of human experience. But she started studying shame and vulnerability, and you can see in her TED talk what that was like for her. Somebody who really didn't want to be vulnerable, and landed herself in 2 years of therapy. I think she'll just tell you in the TED talk when she started uncovering from people what is this shame thing. So the way she does her research is she just gathers lots of stories and lots of information from all kinds of places and comes up with, well, what are we looking at here? So this is the definition she came up with: the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Right? I can say I have that sometimes, if not more than once or twice, lots of times I feel that way. I'm not worthy of love and belonging. Where does that come from? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight and demystify it a little bit, because, well, first of all, another thing she says is the truth about shame is that we all have it. Nobody wants to talk about it, and not talking about it makes it worse. So we're going to talk about something that we all have, and we're going to, take that skeleton out of the closet and just kind of untangle it a little bit. I want to just kind of mention how trauma and shame have a similar neurobiology. So many of you may know about trauma. We know about trauma-informed care now, and it's just changed the field of addiction and treatment, because we know that oftentimes addiction comes from trauma, and we're trying to feel better. And that neurobiology of trauma that we're going to touch on briefly a little bit tonight is very similar to shame. And shame and trauma are kind of really good friends. They often, hang out together. And for me, because my work had been around grief and parenting, I saw more of the shame, implicit shame, than explicit trauma in my work. And so I was fascinated when the research started to show us that it's all very similar and it all kind of goes together. And I'm calling it like shame sanctioned mini traumas, the shame that happens to us in our lives, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. There's also varying degrees of trauma and shame. And you see here 2 bridges. One is the top one is a little footbridge in the mountains here in Colorado. And the other one is a bridge. I Googled what's the biggest bridge in the US, and this is I think it's in New Orleans. So you have a little bridge and a big bridge. And I use that to compare little shame and big shame, because shame is a rupture in interpersonal bridges with self and others, where we start to lose connection with ourselves. And so there's ruptures in bridges, and to varying degrees. Like in trauma, we may say big T's and little T's. A big T would be, sexual abuse, a car accident, something really, really serious. And a little T would be, which I don't think is so little, but, maybe a move or a divorce, or, I don't think we can really quantify big T, big bridges, little bridges, because it all looks the same in the neurobiology, which is, again, so cool that we know this now. So, and it's also very somatic, meaning that you can't necessarily change it from the neck up by thinking about it, because, and I'm going to explain this to you, how that happens. It impacts the whole body. So another way to kind of look at the difference between, or how trauma and shame are similar and different, is that because trauma is more explicit and shame is more implicit, meaning that, well, let's look at Sylvan Tompkins' quote here: while terror and distress hurt, they are wounds inflicted from the outside that penetrate the smooth surface of the ego, but shame is felt as an inner torment, a sickness of the soul. And I think, again, back to nobody wants to talk about it. We all have it. I mean, we can talk about trauma, maybe if we've, been in therapy and we've had supportive people to help us talk about our trauma, but talking about our shame, that's a whole other thing, right? So I think I've devoted my work lately to really helping people demystify shame. So the difference between, I'm gonna actually go back and forth here because I want to talk about core shame and guilt, and then also just guilt and shame we can feel guilty if we did something bad, like I know, like, maybe we feel like we shouldn't have relapsed, or we shouldn't have said that thing to somebody, or we shouldn't have acted out in that way, or we shouldn't have spent all our money, or, we shouldn't have done certain things in our lives. That's guilt. And it can be just a top layer of shame, but we're talking tonight about core shame, which is I am bad. And that's the difference, is it's me. It's this identity. Like if we go back to Brene Brown's definition, the feeling that I'm tragically flawed and unworthy of love and belonging, it becomes our identity. So core shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. So I want to go back and speak to again about this core shame being a primary affect that's induced from ruptures in interpersonal bridges that becomes a part of one's core identity. So like I was talking about the bridges earlier, bridges, we're wired for connection. And when we've had ruptures in those connections with people in our lives, especially early in our lives, in the first 3 years when the right brain's developing, we start to think that we're not worthy of love and belonging. And that core shame starts to develop. So again, core shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad, becomes an identity. So it becomes I am flawed, a fraud, never good enough, unworthy of love, a failure, bad. I don't know how many of you want to just kind of think about, oh, yeah, I felt that way sometimes. So, it's like, what is that? If I did something bad and I feel guilty and I make amends and I move on, then what keeps me stuck in this shame? That's what we're talking about tonight. It's core shame or toxic shame. People have called it toxic shame. I call it core shame because I feel like it becomes our identity, this I'm not enough. So how does it get set up? Well, this is a really brief overview of the evolution of the human brain. The reptilian brain many years ago was all we had, right? And that was our instinct and our trying to stay safe in the world, running, fleeing, or hiding from the saber-toothed tiger. And then the brain grows into the limbic system, which is our emotion and our motivation. And so it gets a little bit more complex. And then we develop language and perception and other ways of thinking and being. And yet what's happening is when we're in shame and trauma, the reptilian brain and the limbic system hijack the language and perception because we are trying to run from the saber-toothed tiger, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. But first I want to think about, so the brainstem here, the reptilian brain is here. And from that brainstem, we have the vagus nerve, which is the largest cranial nerve that comes from the brainstem and goes all the way down. So you can see it in this picture. This is the nerve that comes from that part of your brain that gets hijacked when it's in trauma and shame. That's what I mean when it's somatic. So now it's gone down into your body. So if you have digestive issues, your heart races. Physical illnesses, the vagus nerve, we know now, Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory has helped us evolve what we know about the nervous system, and primarily with this vagus nerve and how it conveys information to the autonomic nervous system about emotional safety. So this is why when we're in trauma and shame, we feel kind of out of control, right? It's because we've got our nervous system is going, oh no, what's happening? I'm being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Oh my gosh. And so even though the autonomic nervous system is evolving, we still go back to these primitive responses of immobilization and mobilization. It feels, when we're in trauma and shame, it feels like we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So what we know now with polyvagal theory is, as we evolve, let's look at how lifestyles have changed. You know, we got a lot more modern conveniences today than we did back in the caveman days when, you know, you're just trying to find food and shelter and build a fire to cook your, you know, your fish or whatever to survive. We have electricity and we have, you know, modern conveniences. Even it may be minimal, but we still, food and shelter is a little bit easier now than it used to be back in the day. And so what we have, we live longer, lifespans are longer. We have social media, we have the internet, we have global. So Porges is looking at what he calls the social engagement system, which is another layer now of the autonomic nervous system related to how we relate to other people and connect in relationship. And because we have a lot to learn about how to do that, because I always say we're the only species that has to research itself to know how to get along with each other, because the animals seem to figure it out instinctually, but we've got this brain that kind of screws things up. And so now we've created this pretty messed up way of connecting and not connecting with people that really influences how we feel safety in our autonomic nervous system. So if we look at the social engagement system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, if it's functioning well, we have openness, positive expectations, and trust. If it's not functioning well and it feels unsafe, it's hard to access rational thought. Your energy moves into defensive instinctual responses. And that's when we start to hijack things and act out in ways that we don't quite understand. Okay, I know this is a lot. Hopefully everyone's following me, Ted, or do you think I have a lot of words and a lot to say, so I want to make sure.
Patty, you know, the nice thing is you get to throw so much at us and we get to do a suntan and we get to process it for the next 3 months.
Okay.
So stay on, right? It's so wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Because what I'm going to do is we're going to dive even a little bit deeper into now what happens when this social engagement system is unsafe, which is what is happening in trauma and shame. So bear with me here, because we're going to pull out of this horrible stuff and get to the other side later, but just bear with me. So early relationships set the stage for this emotional safety in adult relationships. And what we know now from EEGs, electroencephalograms that study brain waves, is in the first 2 to 6 years of life, your brain is operating in lower level theta waves, which is relaxation, meditation. It's a low frequency likened to hypnosis, and it's highly programmable. So in those first 6 years of life, everything around us becomes our reality. So the fundamental behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes we observe in our parents become hardwired as synaptic pathways in our subconscious mind. So this is the tricky piece here for me because, well, not the tricky piece here for me, but the tricky piece that I've discovered is because it goes unconscious, we grow up and we think, oh, that was my childhood. It just happened. It wasn't that big of a deal. And we may in our logical mind think it shouldn't be a big deal, but we're still acting in ways we don't quite understand. So when we got this information, I got this information, I was like, that makes perfect sense. Well, no wonder. Because I was with my clients, I was thinking a lot of what I'm noticing is it's probably pre-verbal stuff that's been happening to them. Because again, it's that implicit, we don't have an exact trauma that we can identify necessarily, but there's a sense of shame and disconnect, because shame starts in attachment. it starts early on. And of course, we all blame it all on our parents, right? See, you can let yourself off the hook and not be accountable and blame it on your parents. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, if we demystify core shame and we look at, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some old parenting practices that are still in our subconscious mind, we're not doing it the way it needs to be done very well, because we're still learning. Healthy attachment is when we're seen and we're heard and we're held and we feel safe, because the first 3 years of life, your right brain is developing, which is your feeling brain, before your thinking left brain, and it's nonverbal, and we just want to be seen and heard. But what do? We let the baby cry. We do this not to make people feel guilty for anything that they've done, because that doesn't matter either. We can change all this, but we're just learning a new story. But ideally, for people to feel worthy of love and belonging and not have ruptures or too many ruptures. There's always ruptures because we can repair them. But we don't have too many ruptures in those early relationships, and we want to feel a sense of connection. So I love this painting by a local artist, Sandra Bierman, here, because you can just see the light that comes in that connectedness, right? And I just want to put a shout out to one of my dear mentors and teachers and guides, Catherine Kersey. She passed away last September, and after 10 years of dementia. But I did an early childhood graduate program with her back in the 90s. Yeah, the beginning, late 80s, early 90s. And these are two quotes that I love, that I use all the time. Every child comes into the world very much like a packet of seeds with no cover on the front. And it's our parents' job, very much like the gardeners, to provide the adequate water, air, sunshine, nutrition. In order for the flower to grow to its highest potential, it's not our job to raise a rose into a carnation or a carnation into a rose. So she was busting myths of the old parenting practices that I'm going to, in my next slide, scare you with. But she was committed and said, children are our greatest natural teachers. Let's do something different. She said, every child needs at least one person who's always there for them, never gives up on him, and can't resist the urge to kiss his dirty face. She also told me the frog story, and that's why the frog is here. When I did a teaching assistantship with her, and I was going through a pretty messy divorce at the time from an abusive husband. And she said, somebody told me once that when people are abusing you and saying mean things to you, that you just imagine you're putting on a frog suit. And so as they're yelling and screaming, you're imagining putting on one leg and then the other leg, and you're zipping up this tough skin so you don't take it in. So she helped me get out of an abusive marriage with my frog suit. So shout out to Kitty Kersey. And I know she's here with us today because this is important work for all of us to learn, that we are changing a paradigm and we are building something that's never been done before. Because let's get to the scary slide here. Alice Miller was a Swiss psychoanalyst who studied 18th century child rearing texts, and she called them poisonous pedagogies because they were shame-based systems that encouraged parents to withhold love and affection, to beat the devil out of a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum, to humiliate, to ridicule. And the ultimate goal was to break the will of the child before old enough to remember. So now let's go back to what I was saying earlier about the first 7 years of life and the theta brainwaves and how we absorb all of this. And so when you put before the child is old enough to remember, that's going to be happening in those first 7 years. And we also know, we have research that shows us that we're carrying 14 generations of ancestral DNA. So a lot of people poo-poo this and think, oh, the 18th century was long ago and doesn't affect me, right? But why in my research with women who don't feel good enough as mothers do I see this unconscious repetition, or wanting to do the opposite, but never a really kind of how do we find what we do instead, right? So again, sorry about the scary slide, but I got good news coming up, I promise. But I just wanted to say, this demystifies what is happening inside us all, because we want to think. That was the thing that came up in my research is moms thought it's just me. Brene Brown's first book was, I thought it was just me, but it isn't. This is how I demystify shame for my clients. And I say, guess what? We're up against a collective belief that was shame-based. It isn't just you. It's all of us. So let's restory that, which is what we're going to do tonight for a minute. And then you can continue on doing it in different ways. But so this shame story is what gets set up early on as kids are seeking safety. They start making up stories to defend against shame and feel safe. And then by 7, it's all set up and until we excavate it and reprogram it. And so that's what we're doing in the work of emotional literacy and sobriety, is we're giving ourselves permission to kind of go, wait a second, what is in there, that this belief that doesn't work for me, and how do I acknowledge that pain so I can create a different story? So let me just tell you a little bit of the stories here briefly that get set up. It shows up in a lot of different ways, but Linda Hartling talked about 3 strategies of disconnection. So what happens in the shame stories, because now we're starting to use the cognitive mind as we develop, and we're starting to figure out, oh, it's not safe. I got to do something. I got to run from that saber-toothed tiger. I'm not feeling socially engaged. I'm not feeling safe. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to either move away from the situation. I'm going to hide, isolate, avoid. Maybe I'm going to move towards and be overgiving, people-pleasing, codependence, really the nicest person you'll ever meet, right? So I can feel safe. Or I might move against. I might lash out and fight and hurt you because I'm really mad. So some of you might notice you might move in one direction more than the others. You might move in and out of the different directions, but you may be able to relate to, these are what we do. We're wired for connection, but we feel disconnected. We don't feel safe in connection, so then we try and disconnect. Am I going too fast, Ted? How am I doing? Okay. So just some other basic ways that another way to call it is defending against our shame. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because they each could have their own workshop, right? But just, we don't think about this. We don't think that these things that we do every day could be a defense against shame and our fear of not being worthy of love and belonging, and how we're trying to find emotional safety. Narcissism, of course, is a big thing people are talking about today. And the narcissist has a heavy defense against shame. I'm going to make sure that I'm right. I'm going to make sure that you do what I need you to do because that helps me feel safe. Or maybe addiction, addictive behaviors. I'm going to just cover up and numb because I don't want to feel. We're going to project onto other people. She does this or he does that. Similar to blame and shaming, rationalization, talking ourselves out of it, lying, rage, when people get really angry, like in the earlier slide, that's that moving towards, rage is also a really heavy duty shame defense. Perfectionism, which actually has its own slide in a minute, I'm going to show you. Hopelessness, where we just kind of give up. Again, that would be the moving away. Denial, avoidance, also moving away. I just can't deal. I'm just going to hide. I'm going to minimize. I got little shame. I got little T's, not big T's. That person has it worse than me, right? And so we talk ourselves out of what we're feeling. Codependency, like I said earlier, is another one. You might want to think about if there's any others. Usually when I do this workshop with therapists, they throw in, self-harm and all kinds of other things that, are also defenses against shame. I think shame's like the hub of a wheel. Of course, I am always looking now through the lens of shame, just because it used to be I looked through grief. Where's the grief? Now it's like, where's the shame? But honestly, and I think, Ted, you and I talked about this in the Facebook Live, grief and shame are really good friends too, right? And I learned about shame when I was ashamed of my grief when I was a kid. So it's not safe to talk about these things that are hard. So I'm always looking for grief and shame. So you might have if you want to jot down in your notebook, if there's other ones that you think of that may be a defense against shame, also jot down maybe which ones. I'll go back to the first slide for a minute. If you tend to move away, move towards, move against, if you lean more to one or the other, just jot that down. Again, moving away is isolating and avoiding and hiding. Moving towards is people pleasing, codependency. And that's hard to think that, we love our people pleasers and codependents, don't we? Because they're really nice. And we think, how could they have shame? They're so nice. It's like, because they want to find love. And so they overgive and they deplete themselves. We have to take care of ourselves and have a balance in give and receiving. And then, of course, lashing out and fighting. Any of these maybe come up for you, just jot it down. And then I'm going to just perfectionism again, give it its own slide, because shame lives in the shadow of perfectionism. And this is what Brene Brown said. It's that, again, that desire to not be flawed. And the perfectionist link to shame is the desire not to be exposed or discovered as having a presumed flaw. So, yeah, just if there's anything you want to jot down now that's coming up, would be a good time, because we're going to get into the positive and from here. So if there's anything else you just want to jot down real quick. Okay. The good news is we know now from the study of epigenetics that we have neuroplasticity, which is we can change our DNA. Yay. We can create new neural connections that say, I'm safe. Yay. So all the horrible stuff I just told you doesn't do good to go back and blame and shame and criticize and think, oh no, I'll never get over this. You will. You can. I demystified how hard it is. I demystified it a little bit to show you that you're up against, we're creating a whole new paradigm. If you haven't noticed, we've been living through some pretty turbulent times lately. And COVID made us look at things that maybe weren't working so well, because we like to stay with what's familiar. And if you look at the word familiar, you might see family liar or 2 words in it. We like to stay with what's familiar, and we think that we're going to find safety there. But as I showed you earlier, that's not where the safety is. The safety is writing a new story. So my cat's back and agrees. Yeah. Which is perfect. Oh, look, she has perfect timing, because what I think is we're going to do now is I'm going to do one more slide, and then we're going to take a little break, because Lawrence had suggested that you may need a 5 or 10 minute break, and you probably do, listening to all that. But I want to kind of set the stage for a little positive coming up in the next half. So this Fantastic 5 exercise I created during COVID for my clients, because what they were going through were nervous system responses that were activated from the trauma of COVID, this unexpected life changes, losing jobs, losing lives, losing, such an increase in addiction and relapse and fear and terror. COVID scared us. And so my suggestion was that what we have to do to calm the nervous system is come into present moment. John Kabat-Zinn, who studied mindfulness and meditation, defines mindfulness as moment-to-moment non-judgmental awareness. So we want to come into present moment. So I thought this is a fun way to think about it, the Fantastic 5. So find 5 things around you that feel safe, like the sun, the birds, your pets. See how Mowgli timed that just right? She got me through COVID, didn't you? You did. Yeah. A comforter, a stuffed animal. And so when you do that, you go, oh, like if I'm petting Mowgli, I'm like, oh, that feels soft. She has really soft fur. Okay. So I kind of like tell the nervous system just to settle down, because we're not going to solve the problems of the world today. We can't cure COVID today. We can't get a new job today. So let's be in the present moment right now and find 5 things that feel good. So that's what I want you to do, is just to notice 5 things right now and write them down that feel good. It might be the chair you're sitting in. It might be a plant. It might be a bird outside your window. It might be your favorite pillow. It might be your partner. It might find, I want you to write down 5 things in your little notebook. And then we'll take a Lawrence 5 or 10 minute break. So whenever you're feeling really stressed, and we're going to talk about some other tools too, but I just like to keep this in mind, find your fantastic 5 right now, right here, right now, like what feels good. What can I touch? Because you want to use your senses to get into present moment. All right. So the title had self-compassion on that long title. So I figured I needed to talk about self-compassion a little bit in this. And pretty big building, huh? Like we're building self-compassion. Self-compassion, we can use that word like, well, you got to love yourself more, have compassion for yourself. And I'm guessing most of you are like, yeah, right. Okay. Ain't gonna go. Yeah. You can maybe love your cat or your partner, but yourself, not so much. And why is that? Because it is all part of that defenses against shame that got set up early on that keep us from believing that we're worthy of love and belonging. So I call my work authenticity architects, because I really started thinking about when we're reconstructing the authentic self, it's like building a house. So building self-compassion feels like designing and building a huge structure like this. So again, demystifying why it's so hard, and you're not alone. I also want to say that you're going to be writing a new story that's never been written before. And that, you remember I said the stories that got set up in the first 7 years that are all in the subconscious and implicit memory. And so now what we're trying to do is we're trying to write a new story. But again, the world is very different from what it's ever been before. And so again, to demystify why self-compassion might feel a little uncomfortable or challenging, it's because it's like you've got a blank canvas in front of you, and most people are terrified of art, right? If somebody gave you a blank canvas and said draw, you'd go, oh yeah, right. You don't know what's going to go on that canvas. And I think that's what we have to do, is give ourselves grace and realizing we're trying to write a new story, which is the exciting part. Back to the paradox again. We don't want to necessarily go back to this old stuff that I just talked about, right? We want something new, but we just don't have the guidebook yet. And so that makes this a little bit challenging, but also kind of exciting to have a blank canvas. So I'm going to talk about some ways that we can do that. We can write the new story. And Porges, who created polyvagal theory, came up with 4 R's, and Deb Dana in one of her books writes about these 4 R's, and I've added one more. So let me tell you what they each are. First of all, you got to recognize when you're in one of these shame defenses that I talked about, like the moving away, moving towards, moving, whenever we're having an emotional reaction, we recognize that and we go, oh, I'm having it. Then we respect that. Like that was something I created early on to feel safe, by golly. Okay. But I'm learning it's not working for me. So we want to regulate back into the Fantastic 5 and some other things I'm going to talk about in a minute you can do to find that social engagement safety somehow. And then we're going to write this new story again. And this is going to happen in this emotional literacy sobriety work is around paying attention to what I'm feeling and respecting the behaviors, because This is what I learned, but I'm also going to try a new story. I'm going to regulate a little bit and do a new story. And then I added repeat, 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 because here's the thing. And this is what Bruce Lipton, who studied epigenetics, said, is that because all of this is set up in the theta brainwaves, we have to continually repeat because we're going to want to go back to that familiar story. And this is what happens a lot of times with shame, is then people start thinking, why am I back there? Because I had it today and now it's gone. And then the shame comes back up and we're lost in this shame spiral cesspool. So we need to remember that, we're always using our 4 R's as we build this self-awareness that's going to help us create the new story. One of the tools that I use with my clients is the ABCs. And I came up with this because remember when I said the thinking or the frontal lobe goes offline because we're in this reptilian brain trying to run for safety. We can't really think clearly, and we're not going to remember necessarily to do this, right? It's nice in theory on paper right now, but you're not going to remember it when you're in it. So one tool I suggest, and a lot of these things are on my website under emotional skill builders, so you can print them off and with lots of more information. But just to give you the overview, I say ABC it. If you're feeling dysregulated, emotions are coming up, ABC it. I'm going to acknowledge I got a feeling. I'm going to take a deep breath. And then I'm going to use a sea shovel, because the sea shovel is helping me write a new story. And I call them sea shovels because we really have to dig really deep to find the other aspects of self that aren't related to the old story. Curiosity, courage, compassion, and connection. When we're in curiosity, we can't be in shame, because now I'm no longer in the old story. I'm just being curious about what's happening here. And so it lightens the nervous system's response a little bit. I'm going to have courage to stick with this. It may not be easy, but I'm going to hang in. I'm going to have compassion for myself and other people, because we're all doing this. Everybody has it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Not talking about it makes it worse. So let's have a little bit compassion for ourselves and one another if we can. And then reconnect with ourselves, maybe our loved ones, but just think about the C's instead of what the old story is. If you're in your old, I want to lash out and be angry, or I'm in one of my old defenses. ABC it. Acknowledge you got a feeling, take a deep breath, use one or more of the sea shovels. That's present time moment. You got your fantastic fives and your ABCs. And I make up these acronyms and fun names to help you remember, because you're not going to remember. So if you think ABC, fantastic five, when you're in it, okay, right, okay. Acknowledge, breathe, sea shovel. And what we're then wanting to do on a bigger scale, and not necessarily in present moment time, but later in our journals and our work with our therapist or our sponsor, our work in the steps, we're going to work with our emotional literacy. And that's just, most of us have been raised in families where the emotional literacy has been, stop crying before I give you something to cry about. You should be ashamed of yourself. Don't be angry. It's only an ice cream cone. Get over it. You're okay. So what we've learned about our emotions is that they are bad, therefore we are bad, and there's the shame again, right? So we want to give language, which is what Brene Brown's doing in this book, Atlas of the Heart. It's all about, she's divided it into all, it's like a dictionary for emotions. We want to kind of, what am I feeling? What is that feeling? The average number of emotions my clients can identify are frustrated, mad, and sad. And Brene Brown talked about in her research, the 3 that she came up with was happy, sad, and pissed. But we have so many more parts of our emotional self that we don't know because we've never learned them. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to develop an emotional vocabulary in a minute. But first, I want to read you a poem by Rumi. It's called The Guest House. You can either close your eyes and listen to me or read along, but I want you to just take in, because poetry can be really healing. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And I love that, because we try and talk ourselves, I'm going to turn a light on here because it's got a little dark. We try and talk ourselves out of the uncomfortable emotions because we've been shamed out of the uncomfortable emotions. You know, stop crying before I give you something to cry. What's your problem? You should be ashamed of yourself. You know, and again, that's that 18th century parenting pedagogy that still is in our unconscious repetition. And even though we're saying we're not doing it, we all are, because we don't have the new story yet. We haven't really finished writing this, and not that we'll ever really finish it, because it's always a creative process, but we're so afraid of the bad, and they're not bad. I don't even like good and bad. The uncomfortableness, tolerating discomfort, like, you know, Ted's work with grief. You know, how do we tolerate that discomfort? We don't like it much, and we live in a culture that wants to make it all good. If we feel good, then you're good, and we're good, and everything's okay. But it's that, again, it's that paradox that part of grief is love, or love is grief, right, Ted? It's like the depth of our love is the depth of our grief. And so we're going to feel bad if we're grieving. We're going to feel bad about things in our life that are hard. We don't want to get stuck there, which is what happens when we don't recognize our emotions. So if you look at the word emotion, you can see emotion, which is energy in motion. There's an energy to our emotions that needs to move. You have to go through it. You can't go around it, because but you don't want to stay stuck in the dark tunnel. It feels dark, but we want to move through it. And we try and go around it, but we can't. So we tend to stay stuck in it. And so, and again, I know, Ted, the work with grief is all about that, right? It's we got to go through the pain. We can't go around it. And we may need supportive witnesses to witness this for us, which are very precious people in our lives, people who can sit with us and hold us as we're going through that dark tunnel.
Thanks, Patty. And we grieve that we're having to grieve. And that's where that shame can dive in so deeply. Thanks for bringing that in.
Yeah. And there's so much grief with COVID right now. Doesn't have to be a physical death. It can be the loss of our jobs, the relationships that we lost in this time that we were apart, the job changes, all kinds of traumas that happened. And it's a lot of feels that we have to move through and tolerate. So I want to talk a little bit more about feelings, but I want to start with anger, because anger is, like I said, when Brene Brown's research and my work with clients, anger is usually, what do you feel? I'm mad. Okay, we know that we're angry, but anger is like the top of the iceberg, right? But it's important. And again, back in the olden days, which weren't that long ago, feelings and behavior were seen as the same thing. So don't be angry is really like, don't hurt your brother. You can be angry at your brother, but don't hurt your brother. And it was just, don't be angry. right? And so again, we've talked ourselves out of that feeling of anger. But the thing about anger, when we talk about emotion, energy, emotion, anger's got a lot of energy to it, right? We know when we're mad, right? And that's usually the one that really trips us up, because it has so much energy and we don't know what to do with it, because we don't realize that it's okay to be angry. It's totally fine. You just don't want to hurt yourself or anybody else. You want to find something that you can productively do with this anger, which again takes a lot of time and work. But Catherine Kersey, the woman that I showed you with the frog suit earlier, this is one of the things she taught us about ways to express anger from the least effective to the most effective. And the least effective is turning it inward or lashing out at somebody. So depression is anger turned inward. Lashing out is, I'm punching the nose, you son of a, whatever. That's what most people do with anger, because they don't know what to do with it. And so it's not really effective, but it's ways people express anger. The more productive, moving down into more productive is, or healthy, because I'm saying the word productive here, non-productive or productive outlet, is to move the energy. And so a non-productive outlet would just be beating your pillow, or they have rage rooms here, which I'm dying to get to, where you can throw dishes in rooms and stuff. Just like you're not really producing anything, but you're moving that energy. It's got to move. Stomping your feet. Productive outlets more have and something happens, like if you're kneading bread and you're baking bread, you got a loaf of bread. If you're doing aerobics, you're getting healthy. If you're painting a wild abstract picture, you got a piece of art. So something is produced from that, but both of them are just really about moving the energy. And then the next is to talk about it. Most effective is to problem solve. So if I'm angry, anger is giving me some information that I'm feeling out of control, or it's giving me information about what I might want in my life. So maybe I need to talk to the person after I've used one of the productive or non-productive outlets to move some of the energy, and I've gotten a little bit more regulated. I may have a conversation. And then problem solving, there's a whole 6-step problem solving solution, which is much more complex. And again, all these are on my website, but just think about that top of the iceberg, anger first, because that's what we usually notice. And now we're going to talk about some of the other feelings underneath, and how those are the ones that are harder to identify. So this is the exercise that my clients get so tired of me saying, did you do the excavation exercise? I use it over and over and over, because I feel like it's key to this emotional literacy. And it's based on an I statement. Many of you may have learned about I statements. I statements were created for nonviolent conflict resolution. But what I've found in my many years of doing this work is they often don't work really well for that, because you may say, when you do this, I feel this way. And what I'd really like is, and your partner or whomever gets dysregulated and gaslights or comes back with something and defends. And then now you're dysregulated. So the I statement's out the window and you're like, this stuff doesn't work, right? So they're very effective for that. But I think unless you've spent a lot of time with emotional literacy and sobriety and awareness, people usually get dysregulated. But what I discovered is it's a great journal exercise because you then can think about what you're feeling and what you're really wanting in the situation, but you're not worried about what the other person's going to say at this point. You're just developing your emotional literacy and you're getting your power back. So, let's see, how much more do I have left and how much time? I was going to say we could maybe do a little piece of this, but I don't know if we're really going to have time. But if you have a situation right now that happened, like somebody really upset you about something, brief. You want it to be brief. And again, this is on my website under Psychotherapy Emotional Skill Builders. It's a whole 4 or 5 page handout with the instructions and how to do it. Feel free to print it off and use it. But if there's a situation on your mind right now, like so-and-so told me out to shut my mouth, or that I was an idiot today, and simple, not like the world's falling apart or my boss is an idiot or whatever. It's just one little thing helps us build that emotional literacy, because we're going to break it down really tiny to something I can observe and define. And then you may have written something down. Go to the feeling word sheet. And that's, again, on the handout on my website. And so you get to look at, people come up with angry, frustrated, sad, annoyed. So we don't count those. Those are easy. So I want you to find something else. So if you have a situation in mind, just look through this list and pick. Sometimes people have like 10, 20. And then if you do, that's fine. But then pick the top 3 with the most charge, and then here's what's really going on. Here's what I'm feeling. I might be feeling. So somebody called me an idiot. That was the one I said. Somebody calls you an idiot, you're going to feel what? Offended, horrified, maybe betrayed, scared. So you start to go, oh, I'm naming something now that I'm feeling that didn't have a name, the problem that has no name, right? Wow, that's interesting. And so you start to develop that emotional vocabulary, which is really going to help you feel more empowered for the rest of your life, really. But you got to, again, repetition. That's why I say to my clients, did you do the exclamation exercise? And they get real tired of me saying that, but I say it anyway. So, and then if not, do you want to do it now? We'll do it together. But let's get to this feelings. And then another piece that we're not going to get into tonight that I do with the shame story is I go back to where did these feelings show up in that first 7 years. But we're not going to do that tonight, because I think we're staying present time with developing our emotional literacy and that. And then the third part is my aspired action. Like, what would I really want? So when you said I was an idiot and I felt, humiliated or whatever, what I really would like is for you not to call me names, and maybe we can treat each other with a little bit more respect. The problem with that third part, though, is people get really upset because they haven't had a history with the person who did that to them that indicates that could ever happen. And so then they get another layer of emotions coming up because they can't have that. So I want you to, if you do that part, to detach from the outcome, because it's not about that, because that's a long-term thing that may or may not happen. But for you to really recognize what you really need, I need to be treated with respect. So now you got a feeling, now you got something you want in that new story. I want to be treated with respect. Maybe you might not be treating me with respect, and maybe you never will, but I know that that's what I want in my life. So that's how we're developing our emotional literacy, is by creating that story. And again, we're going to work with other feelings because we're not getting it, but that's a whole other piece that we don't have time for tonight. But the main thing is the deep sea dive helps you identify these feelings. And these aren't even all the feeling words. I really need to update this list. That's that. I'm just going to keep moving on, and then maybe we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions. We talked earlier about paradox. I think it's really important to realize that Kahlil Gibran in his poem says, some of you say joy is greater than sorrow, and others say, nay, sorrow is the greater. But I say to you, they're inseparable. They're two sides of the same coin. And again, back to the splitting that I talked about earlier, we make it all good or bad or this or that. We have to be able to hold the tension of the opposites and tolerate our pain and discomfort, and know that if we resist it, it's going to persist and sometimes even grow stronger, as Carl Jung says. So we've already kind of talked about that. I'm going to move on into activating your right brain. So when I talked about the first 3 years of life, your nonverbal feeling right brain develops before your thinking left brain, verbal left brain. So when we want to change, neuroplasticity comes from building new neural connections in our right brain, because that's our feeling side, not our thinking side. We can't do this in our logical mind from thinking. We can, cognitive stuff helps create a structure, but we want to really give ourselves permission to feel better and to work with developing new neural connections in the right brain. So I have a whole bunch of things here, and these are all things I go over in my trainings for therapists, but I want you to just look at this list for a minute and pick one that you might like or might be interested in exploring after our workshop tonight, because I like to find something that my client likes. Like, does my client like to journal? Letter writing is a great journal activity. Prosody, which is the rhythm behind sound. And that's why poetry is good, music. If you like to sing or play an instrument, if you like to meditate, experience mindfulness, be in nature, your cat, your animals, something creative. I work a lot with mandalas. There's coloring books out that a lot of people have, playing, just having fun, and humor, play and humor. I didn't put that on there. If you like to do yoga, movement, dance, if any rituals that you do, fire ceremonies, walking a labyrinth or a fire pit like Ted has it. Golden Willow, dreams, working with our dreams, using imagination to create that new story, visualizing what we want instead. I know this is a whole lot. And again, if we were doing a week-long retreat or something, we'd be playing around with some of these. But if there's something on here that you go, ooh, I got a coloring book and I haven't colored lately, I'm going to get that out. I'm going to make a commitment to do that this week at some point, or yoga or dance or something like that. So back to prosody and music. I love music. And again, that's how I met Ted, is the big barn dance, which I can't wait. It's my therapy weekend retreat. So if you like music, think about a song that helps you feel brave, or you can also have your songs about peace or songs about love or whatever. But, for this example, I have Find Your Brave song. What helps you feel strong? Think about how that song inspires you, and then play it all the time and feel that courage. Feel you're brave. Okay, so this is a 7-inning stretch. I'm going to play a song for you, and I'm going to let you get up and just move for a couple minutes. It's like a 3-minute song. I may stop it before it's over because I just have a couple more slides. I think we're doing okay with time. But don't take this literal. This is my friend Rebecca Folsom, and I would have done a Michael Hearn song or something. The girl just loves to dance, but I didn't have time to contact Michael. I've never actually personally met Michael yet. But my friend Rebecca Folsom, I take voice lessons now, and she gives me permission to use her music in various places. So this was a brave song of hers that I really like. It's called Let's Be Too Much. Don't take it literally, because she talks about burning things down and blowing down the house and burning stuff up. It's not literal. She's an artist, and she's saying, I want to really express myself as an artist, as a musician, singer, songwriter. And sometimes I'm afraid I'm too much. And that's, to me, a shame, is I'm gonna I can't be fully who I am because I'm ashamed. So let's be too much. All right, so I'm going to play it. And if you want to get up and move and stretch for a couple minutes.
I've closed my doors not to keep the world from wandering in, but to keep myself in check and the ripple I might send too much for this place. Let's burn it down in a holy place. Light our passions, scale the walls over the edge like it's nothing at all. Free fall, free fall. Let's be too much. I've closed my eyes not to keep the light from filtering in, but to masquerade and say the lines, but it's wearing thin. I can't hold back, don't know what's next. I can't pretend that at a moment's notice I won't go wild. Tear down the stage I'm in. Let's be too much for this place. Let's burn it down in a holy blaze. Light our passions, scale the walls over the edge like it's nothing at all. Free fall, free fall. Throw open your mind and let the dance begin. Throw open your mind, release yourself to be carried on some wild way.
Okay, there we go. So that wasn't all of it, but almost all of it. And, again, music is so healing. And because we want to activate our senses, our five senses, like the Fantastic Five. Sounds. Stephen Porges says prosody, sound, the rhythm behind music is the most effective sensory healing for that neuroplasticity. So that's why I love the big barn dance. And then nature, of course, is just gone from blowing down the house to being still. This is a quote, I don't know who it's from. Sister Claire in 7th grade gave it to me on a card. And I always think of it. We find ourselves in the quiet moments when the earth pauses and we are still. Sometimes that's the mindfulness. It's that stillness. And these are all ways we build that neuroplasticity. Prosody, nature, being still, mindfulness, and playfulness. I was talking about play earlier, humor, laughter. The research is showing laughter builds neuroplasticity. And so I have a story. I just did a TED talk, not a TED Wired talk, but a TEDx talk here. And I start with my little Nuff. And I did this purposely so I would be able to laugh and start off without terror of standing in front of 1,000 people and with a 16-minute memorized speech. So I thought, I'm going to do this for me. And then I thought, well, this is going to be part of my talk. So halfway through, I pull it up and I say, how many of you smiled or exhaled when you saw this? How many of you chuckled or laughed? That one moment may have contributed to positive changes in your brain known as neuroplasticity. So this little guy was created because I had a smart aleck therapist colleague of mine. When I said shame, what I was learning about shame is learning how to be enough. And he goes, you're enough? I didn't know you were from Nuff. And I thought, ooh, that's a children's book. And I asked a friend to draw me a character. And so my Nuff has now come to life. And hopefully now there was an artist in the TED Talk who's going to help me make Nuff stuff for his art gallery. So how many of you smiled or exhaled or chuckled or laughed? Again, we're out of the shame spiral and the trauma and the nervous system when we're in that moment. So if we can have laughter and play and fun in our lives, you're actually building neuroplasticity. And then when we talk about rewriting a new story and not having, we got this blank slate and we don't know what it is, I always think of, we know what we don't want, right? That's how we write our new story, by identifying what we don't want, so that we can, like I said with the excavation exercise, what do I really want here? I don't want you to call me names. I want to be treated with respect. Shame is that feeling of being unworthy of love and belonging. So what we want is love and belonging. So let's look at Brene Brown's definition of those. And we start to work with that. She says, love is not something we give or get. It's something that we nurture and grow. It's a connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves, which is a big task. But this is what we're talking about. And I love this picture. You know, it's like we're having as much compassion as we can find for ourselves. And that's going to help us love others. And then belonging. We're wired for belonging and connection. And we're talking about ruptures in these interpersonal bridges early on. We want to create a new story of belonging. And true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. So again, big ticket items to develop, and also really important in writing the new story, to give yourself grace, and work with what is that? What would it feel like to love myself and accept myself? Again, it's a big ask because none of us do. I'll admit it. It's a daily practice for me, and I've been doing this work for 34 years. I'm not going to tell you how old I was because then you know how old I am now when I started, but it's a long time. So here we are wrapping up with permission slips again. After all of this, I'm hoping everybody's doing okay. Let's take a deep breath. It was a lot. Thank you for listening to me talk for 2 hours. But this is the last little writing exercise, because at the beginning you said, or I said, give yourself permission to do something tonight that might be different. And after our time together, is there something now when you leave tonight you want to give yourself permission for? So just think about that for a minute and jot that down in your notebook. And these are tough questions, so you might not know, might come up later. It's kind of hard to stretch into these nonverbal implicit pieces of our right brain feeling self. So be gentle with yourself with that too. And it's a lot. And also, you know, if you do feel if anything came up for you tonight, because it's a lot, hopefully you've got your therapist or your sponsor or people you can reach out to. It's okay to reach out and say, wow, that was a lot. Let me process. Just be really gentle with yourself tonight. Find your fantastic five. Be good to you. All right. Put my website here. If anybody wants to be in touch, I have a mailing list you can get on. You can email me if you have questions.
And Patti, I just want to thank you very much. I look forward to, I think we have a lot of work to do together as well as separately. And I really look forward to that, as well as dancing and laughing with Michael Hearn. And one thing I can promise you, I'll make sure you meet him, that we can take care of that piece. And he likes to laugh and dance. So, Lawrence, I want to thank you for making sure that Rio Grande ATP is here to be of service to everybody, as well as do this emotional healing lecture series. And I'd say almost most importantly, thank you for everyone that's here, because if we weren't all here, then we wouldn't be here. And so those of you that are in that bravery of showing up for emotional healing and sobriety and finding new ways to do our lives, and working with that neuroplasticity is so huge. So thank you, everybody. Patti, before you leave, let me get back to the chat for a minute. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it. I love the poem and the song you shared. And thank you. So, and also we better thank Mowgli, who isn't quite as polite because not in cotton shame and has fallen deep asleep. So, thank you, Kevin, as well. So Patti, I look forward to talking with you soon. I'll be giving you a call tomorrow to take care of some logistics as well.
Great.
So blessings to everybody. Lawrence, is there anything you need to say before we call it a night?
Just thank you, Patti. What a pleasure to have you. I want to thank the clients of Rio Grande, Las Vegas, Taos, and Raton. We want to bring more speakers. And what as Ted said, this is about healing. Recovery is alive and well in northern New Mexico. I also want to thank staff, professionals, and the general public for attending. Thank you.
Awesome. And Joseph, if you pull up Patty's website, you can get those pieces. And once again, blessings to you all. Let's stay safe. And Patty also gave a little bit of homework. So let's keep doing our work and repeat, repeat, repeat. And then all of a sudden we have adapted into some new normal behaviors. So have a great night, and we are signing off. Take care.
Thank you all.
Let's be too much. I've closed my eyes not to keep the light from filtering in, but to masquerade and say the lines, but it's wearing thin. I can't hold back, don't know what's next. I can't pretend that at a moment's notice I won't go wild, tear down this stage